going on YouTube? Mr. Football here, and today I want to welcome you guys back to the Homegrown Football Podcast, Episode 2. Today we were talking about how to practice with limited time. So this is a podcasting idea that I've wanted to do. You know that we do this podcast based on, talking about, small schools and talking about, when we practice. Sometimes we're not always blessed with, enough time to practice our players. So that's kind of the idea of today's podcast, is talk about, how we should plan our practice when we don't have a lot of time. Had a lot of experience with this. I've even had less time to do what I wanted to do, even with like the time that I'm going to talk about today, which is like 45, 50 minutes. That's pretty normal, like within the school day, especially if you're practicing like at a school, like you have a class period built in within the school day that you're going to take, your football team out there and you're going to practice on the practice field. So, considering what we could kind of talk about with at limited time, there's different definitions of what we could actually talk about. But we want to talk about how we need to have an effective practice with that short amount of time, because we know that every second, every minute counts towards our time where we're going to have to, the kids are gone. We gotta prepare them, and we want them to be prepared. So how do we plan out that time to where we can get the most out of them in that short amount of time? And that's what we're going to talk about, because if we practice normal during the normal hours of the school day, and that's what we're going to mainly talk about. If you have 30 minutes after school and that's all you can do, then you got to plan for 30 minutes. But when we talk about the school day, we can kind of say, depending on what your scheduling is, we'll say that ours is 45 minutes. Mine, like the school that I'm at right now, 45 minutes is the time per period that you get in the class, or whatever the activity is. So that's what's built in. So if your team goes through, the normal day, your practice time is going to be impacted in some form or fashion. So some questions we should ask is, how are we going to plan our practice to make sure we get our players game ready? If we're talking about football season, we're talking about those kids that get to us, and you're going to see, within the school day, we may see that this is our junior high and our 7th grade, our middle school practices, to where your coaches aren't going to have as much time and contact with your players, say, than the other teams. There might be a varsity or a JV that gets more, time than, say, your younger guys. And it happens. Like, the ones that are going to make and break the school, the ones that everybody's going to come out to on Friday night, they're probably going to get more practice time. And that's what's usually built in. It may be different. Like we're at a school where, everybody's together. And so we all got to work together in that way. I do have this weird line thing here. It is the sun is going down. So the sun's right there, and it's really distracting because I see it in the camera. So I'm going to try not to focus on that, and it'll go away here in a second. So, So one thing that we need to kind of mention, we're going to talk about, practicing within the period of the school day. So, some schools do this, and some don't. I've heard of plenty of schools that, don't practice, their younger players during the day, and that's just how you do it. If that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a template to go with, I've got a template that I'll show you guys nearing the end of this podcast, and kind of leave that for you guys, and kind of show you a way that I would structure it. And it's kind of a good baseline to go off of with that. So just some kind of things just for instance, our junior high is the very last period of the day. So we get those kids at 2:25, during the practice, it takes them good 15 minutes to get ready. You got to go in there and you got to tell them what the game plan is for the day, when we're getting out, or so forth, hustle the practice field. We tell them that by the time you get out there, you've spent 15 minutes in the locker room, 5 minutes walking to the practice field, getting everything set up. Then you finally get into it. But how do you get more out of that? Now, obviously, that's after school. You could go for as long as you probably could, and maybe there's some states that give you, a limitation on that. But we'll talk about our school has a 7th grade athletics period, to where if you're a 7th grader, you have a athletics period to where whatever sport you're in, that's what you're doing for that period. I'm not currently in that period. I coach, or I teach during the period that they have it. So I'm not a 7th grade coach, and I've not been since the 2016 season, which I'm not really complaining about, because I actually enjoy being in the classroom. and not coaching 3 teams. So I only have to worry about 2, so it's kind of nice. But I've done this. Last 2 schools that I've been at have had the 7th grade period. So it is something I'd say is common. But there are plenty of schools out there that may not have that. They may not have that ability. So I will say that it's much easier to manage those 2 teams than having all 3. But for the most part, at one point I had 4 teams. So I mean, it gets easier and easier as I go along in my career. But like I said, I've been actually enjoying only doing varsity and junior high football, so that's actually been it's been quite easy for me. But anyway, I want to talk about some of the problems that I've seen, some of the problems that I've witnessed and been around. Like I said, I've not been in the 7th grade period since 2016, but I want to talk about some of the things that I've kind of developed, and what I've found is some tips that you can use to kind of practice and kind of use as like a template to kind of structure your day when you plan out these practices. Because you need to have a plan. You can't just go out there and throw the ball down and say, all right, boys, here we go. We're going to run our power play right here. We're going to run counter. All right, we're going to run. I heard talking about that. I tried to do the grueling coach voice. The one I tried to do that gruff voice. Sometimes I don't have that. I've not developed it yet. Sometimes I've noticed I've got it. But anyway, we're gonna run Rudy Wright. We're gonna run it all the time. If we don't know that play, then we're gonna suck. So I want us to be efficient. I want us to be efficient in the way that we coach our young players, because our players, when we coach them at such a young level, those kids imprint, and everything that they learn in those beginning stages of football is what they take for the rest of their career. And I fully believe in whatever those kids are experiencing, even if they've experienced football from someone that's not you. If 7th grade's their first experience, and that's what they're going to have for the rest of the time. If they started playing football when they were a kindergartner, and their dad coached them, that's what they're going to remember. So you have to be careful with some of this stuff, but let's kind of talk about 7th grade, just because we will talk about every kind of practice we can get into. I want to talk about our tips here before I get too off topic here. So our first tip in planning our practice with limited time is not to waste time. So we don't want to waste time with pointless things. And what I'm going to say with this, and it may sound crazy, but I don't feel like we need time. We don't need time to stretch. I feel like stretching is just like a time for everybody to just figure out what we're going to do, because we didn't talk about it. So we're going to go through the stretching, and somebody's going to lead the stretching, and we're all going to sit around as coaches and do that. And it's no, let's come up with something that the kids can get out of it, because the kids aren't going to stretch the right way. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you're going to have some kid over here, and you're doing feet spread, hands down the middle, going right leg, going left leg. There's going to be some kid that's picking his nose. Let's be honest, okay? He's picking his nose. He's not stretching the way he's supposed to. Let's get something out of this kid, all right? So let's create a dynamic warm-up. I don't care if it's, running down to the end of the practice field and running back. That's technically a warm-up. You're getting them warmed up. The point of stretching is obviously we're getting our muscles warm, but if the kids aren't stretching right, because they're kids. They're 12 and 13 years old. They've got the attention span of a gnat. You need to get them focused on football. When you get those kids in football period, they're in football mode. Get them in football mode. So come up with a dynamic warm-up. Tackling circuits. I love tackling circuits. Especially it's just a quick way to teach tackling. If you obviously need to teach the tackling first, but if you can make it to where they're tackling the donuts. We call them donuts, but the tackling wheels. Doing cone drills, anything just to get them going and doing those football movements. Doing some cone drills, doing a tackling drill, doing a hawk roll drill. When you get through that, those are all things to kind of do and just integrate. Turnover circuits are great. I love turnover circuits as well. I'm thinking more defensively. You could also, have a quick pre-practice period where, the offensive line might be working on, their steps and their stance. And then you got the quarterbacks and receivers working handoffs, and you got your receivers coach, working on catching. Like that's like a quick little thing to do to get them all warmed up. My number 2 tip for planning an effective practice, planning a practice with limited time, is have a daily focus. You shouldn't walk into a 45-minute block and say, all right, we're going to do offense for this many minutes, we're going to do defense for this many minutes, and then we're going to put it all together at the end. You need to have a daily focus. Let's say that there's 4 days in our week before we've got to go play a game. Monday might be our individual period where we say 20 minutes is worth where we're going to do individual offense work. Remember, we're at a small school, so we only have so many players, and all our players are going to play both ways. So we're going to have like our quarterbacks working together. We're going to have our running backs working with quarterbacks probably because we're going to be limited on coaches as well. We're going to have our offensive linemen working together. If we have a third coach, we can work with receivers, work on catching. And then we might do some defensive drills at the same time. We'll have the defensive line working together, linebackers getting those guys set up, and then the defensive backs having their own time too. So Monday might be just a focus period. Maybe you're working on blocking and tackling in those things in those periods, but it's more of an individual type of a day. Tuesday, and I'm just kind of giving you guys a basis of this. Like if you have to, do this and set it up this way, and maybe you want to set it up different, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea. Tuesday, offensive day, where, we might do a little bit of individual work. Maybe we go over the plays real quick, and then we're repping team offense on Tuesday. Wednesday comes around, maybe that's our defensive period, working all defensive stuff. We're talking about our run fits and our coverages. We're talking about how we're going to go align on this team that we're going to play. If seventh grade games are on Thursday, then our Thursday day needs to be sort of a walkthrough. We're doing everything. We're getting them set up. If you have to do special teams in seventh grade, I'm hearing more and more of this now. It's not been something here in Arkansas where seventh grade have introduced special teams, but I'm hearing more and more of it. But if you have to do that, oh my gosh, that's almost like a whole other world just doing special teams with seventh graders. I have no idea how that would be done yet. That's going to take more scheming by me to kind of think about that. But anyway, like your game day needs to be your walkthrough, going over the final things. Obviously, before the game, you'll have a little bit of time. But that's how you should kind of break it down. And if it's Friday and you have a day off with them, give them the day off. You might you might do that stretching. You might do that dynamic stretching a little more. I wouldn't watch film with seventh graders. You're not going to get anything out of it. And that's just my opinion. Number 3, set an alarm. Set an alarm on your phone. If you have a timing system, set it up. You can set it up to where you can, on your phone, you can have all these different alarms to go off where, you can have it set up. I have this set up for like when I'm in the morning, like I know exactly when I need to be out the door. So you could do this when you're with your coaches. You could say, all right, so you have, 20 minutes to work individual offense, and then there's your 20 minutes. And then once that goes off, gives an alarm. All right, we're going to move on to the next period. So on and so forth. Like that's a simple way to do it. But keep yourself and keep your other coaches on track. Keep your players on track, especially with like getting dressed or whatever, and be like, look, you have 10 minutes to get dressed, and we're walking out the door. Like that's what you need to have happen. I think number 4, I think having more coaches is better. I think 3 coaches is ideal. If you can get 3 coaches in 7th grade, that's awesome. I think that's ideal for 7th grade. You've got obviously a head coach. You've got a couple of assistants there. We've done it as few as with 2, but if you can have 3, I think that's an ideal number. Just to, especially balance out, having enough players. If you have like 18 players on your team, it gives you a good balance of coaches where a lot of kids are getting, attention from each coach. Number 6, emphasize hustle out of your players because you're going to have to get them to practice every day on time. I mean, if they've got to run to the practice facility to get there, get dressed, and then run to the practice field, like get them hustling there, because kids are going to take their own time. Kids are lazy. They're going to take their own time getting there. So, get after them, emphasize that hustle. Number 7, don't make the kids late every day. Don't be the guy that, sends out the school-wide email that says, sorry, I kept the 7th graders late. Don't be that guy. All right. Like I said earlier, put it in your phone when they need to get out of there and get dressed. Make sure they're not late. I know it happens sometimes. It happens to all of us, but get them out of there. Okay. Don't make them late every day. Like, because as a classroom teacher, it kind of bothers me, and I try to be good every year and not write a bunch of kids up for tardies, but it really, like, it gets on my nerves when it's an everyday thing. Like, that's why it bothers me so much. Because, like, I'm a teacher too, all right? And when I want to start class, I want to start class. So, like, that's my thing. Anyway, small teacher rant there. Number 8. This is kind of a weird. This is kind of like just like one I thought of. I didn't put these in order of like rank or anything. But number 8 is keep the pep talks at the end of practice short and sweet. All right, give them those quick announcements. Get them out of there. Don't hound the kids. Get them out of there. Get them moved on. They've had a long practice. They have a long day ahead of them at school. So get them out of there and make sure to just get them hustled in so they can get there and be on time. Let's talk about where time is lost. I think this is something else to kind of mention with this, where we lose time in practice. I know we talked about stretching. I'm not saying that stretching is a bad thing. If you have time to stretch the kids. But like, if you don't have time and you need other things, you're trying to get out of practice at a certain time, then don't worry about stretching. Just get into it. I mean, they're young kids. They're not like old like me, and like it might be beneficial for me to stretch. Okay, so like kids probably were running as they were running to the football field. So like they've obviously they're warm. Okay. I think that's something that's just like an older coach generation. I think, a lot of people have like, heard like, like cheetahs don't stretch or whatever, but I'm going to get off the stretching topic so we can move on. All right. Talk about where time is lost. All right. Time is lost in the locker room. Bottom line. No matter how much you get after them, the kids are getting dressed on their time. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, you have to dictate to them, unfortunately. Like, are you going to leave someone behind sometimes because you got to go and you're behind and they're behind and yeah, because they got all these different practice. They can't find their shoulder pads. They can't find their helmet. And you're just like about to go off because that's just who you are, because you don't know why this person would lose their stuff. So it happens. I would also limit the days you go full pads, because if you're asking the kids to get dressed in full pads, there's always going to be kids there that, didn't pad up their pants. And this is just a kind of a general thing. Like, if you get football girls for your program, give them to your 7th graders first, because your older ones know what to do. They may already have their own, but if you're into that, like I've been to places now for 2 years where we've always bought girls for the kids, and give them to your 7th graders first, because I don't know why it's just a weird thing, but like the older ones need them more, but those young guys, give them to those young guys so they can get dressed and get the heck out of there, and they can keep them for several years until they grow to where they grow out of them. But like I said, I think you can get a lot out of thud practices to where you're just in helmets and shoulder pads, and where those girdles, you're getting more out of that than saying the full pads. I'm not saying like, you might go full pads every now and then, but go half pads. Like that's a good thing. You can still be safe, with those thud up practices. You just have to teach them what thud up is. So, and that's not a hard thing to kind of do. And you can even bring them back after school and go full pads. We currently do that. So that's something also to kind of look at. I even think buying those integrated football pants to where they're like, they advertise them more for like youth football. They're like black or white or whatever color, and you just like the kids just put them on like pants, and then they got all the pads built in, like all 7. Like, I don't think that's a bad idea either, especially with like your young kids. I mean, that's just a time, to me, it's like a time saver. Another place where time is lost is walking to the practice field, and that's the key, is walking. It's one that burns. It's one that burns time. But you have to consider it. Like, yeah, the kids are going to walk there. I've coached at places where the practice field and the field house are on completely opposite ends. And you want those kids to hustle there, and you want them to hustle in as well, because you don't want them to be late, because you're already keeping them out there to that last minute. So like I said, it's better, if you can get to that practice field in the amount of time. Someone's always going to have an issue, even just by getting them fully dressed and getting them out. Like, you're never going to get the kids all out at the same time. There's always going to be that one kid who's lost his helmet, can't find his clothes or whatever, he's not getting dressed on time. That's what it is. We've also done it to where, we didn't have to go as far. Like, you practice on like a place where, like we've even practiced on like the game field before. If you have turf, great. You'd be out there on the turf, but like maybe you get in like the corner of the end zone or like a certain place to where you're not going to tear up the grass, like tear up the, like the midfield part. Well, we've also done, practices like that before. Like I'm thinking about now, where we have our practice field for our 7th grade. It's a good, like, I would say 4 football fields as the crow flies. And you can't ask them to run sometimes, because if they have to cross the street, like, don't let them, like, make sure they're going to be safe crossing the street, and make sure they're supervised. Like, walk behind them or walk in front of them. Like, I don't know, like, just be careful. Like that's my biggest fear is like, I've nearly seen kids getting run over, because where we practice right now, there's a main street that goes through there, and so we have to cross a street, to get from practice field, go across the street. There's the football field, and then there's the field house. So that's just some different observations that I've had on walking to the practice field. It's where you lose time, and it's either getting to practice or coming back from practice to get dressed, and that's what you've got to kind of consider there. How much time you actually have to practice obviously is dependent on the time that you're allotted to practice that. And you got to depend on, depending on the time allotted for that period, you've got to build in the players getting dressed twice. So like, in the total time that you have for that period, let's say you have 45 minutes. Well, you're going to have to build in like dressing time to that, because you can't say that like, all right, well, we'll let them get dressed for 10 minutes, and then the rest of the time is practice. No, like if they have a class afterwards, like they got to get back to class. So that's all, and that's the unfortunate part about it is like, you're going to run into those obstacles. So I came up with a little time breakdown on kind of like what you should kind of look for as far as like when you plan these practices out, and kind of how you should break it down. And I'm going to show you guys an Excel sheet that I made, basically of what I call like a shotgun practice. Just like real quick. I don't know why I call it shotgun practice, but it sounded cool. But I've got one for 45 minutes. I'll also give you a 50-minute breakdown. I'll do the first one here, talking about the time breakdown, just for players. Let's say we got time breakdown here. So I wanted to go through this right here, time breakdown. I've got 2 things that I've done here. I've got a 45-minute period and a 50-minute period. And you can kind of adjust these as you go up and down in time. So I just kind of gave a general idea. And obviously, if you don't have, as long to walk, like you can always save time sometimes. But let's start with our 45 minutes. We have 8 minutes for dressing, first of the period. So, the players got to get there from their class or to school, and they got to get dressed. So you got to give them 8 minutes, because like, it's going to take forever. They got to get undressed, and they got to, put the shoulder pads on, they got to put the helmet on, and, everything else that goes with it. So, I mean, by the time that you get the last kid out, it may be 8 minutes. So let's say that it takes 4 minutes to get to the field. Currently at that point, we're already 12 minutes in. So that's something to kind of look at. Like 12 minutes just to get to practice. We've already burned like a third of the period there. Like, another crazy thing, and this is mind-boggling to me, but it's like 20 minutes to practice football, because I squeezed every possible minute out of this that I could, for 45 minutes. But we're looking at 20 minutes roughly to practice actual football. That's not a lot of time. So that's why I was saying earlier, you got to manage like what you're actually going to do, because you can't do everything in 20 minutes. So break it down day by day by what you're going to do. So 20 minutes to actually practice football, not a lot of time, but you've got to consider those things. Time breakdown, once you get done with the practice and it's like, okay, it's at that point, we got to move on. So 4 minutes to get back to the locker room, 8 minutes to get dressed at the end of the period. And then once that tardy bell ring, or once the first bell rings, get them out of there. Don't make them late. If we do everything by 50 minutes, all we're essentially doing is adding 5 minutes onto our practice plan as far as like what we're actually practicing in football. So that's good for us. So we want that. I'm going to show you as well my Google sheet here and kind of how I broke this down. Like I said, this is my 45-minute practice shell, just to kind of give you a general idea. I wrote on here, for 9 o'clock to 8:09, players arrive and get dressed. If you got 3 coaches, assign each coach a job. Your head coach, or I just put as coach 1. You got a coach doing roll call. Make sure, everybody's there, figuring out where others are. If they're missing, you got to take roll. So, especially, they're going to want you to take roll, no matter what. So, especially if it's, in a class period. So take roll, make sure they're there. You got another coach that's setting up the practice field. Make sure you got practice balls out there. And you got a third coach that's working with water or any equipment issues. So always have a backup coach to, he's either working on make sure there's water out there, whether you fill them up the Gatorade jugs or something like that, fill them with water, and you got a coach for equipment issues. There's always going to be equipment issues. Can't find my mouthpiece. My shoulder pad strap broke. My helmet doesn't fit. Like, those are all things to kind of consider. And then as far as like that goes, I kind of left a blank spot there because that's our time walking. So, you don't have to include that time. If you hustle in there and get there, that's just more time for you to practice. Fantastic. But I'm being realistic here with like our time. But I put this is our Monday practice schedule. So, period 3, 9:12 to 9:22. We've got each thing there. Like I said, like this is like first day stuff. So individual, endo, you've got, quarterbacks, running backs working, stance and steps. Everybody's working stance and steps, just learning the basics of football. You've got O-line coach working with the O-line. You got receiver coach working with the receiver coach and so forth, working on that stuff. And then, if we go to defense, we got a defensive line coach, linebacker coach, defensive back coach. I didn't really put much on this one. I just kind of made this one up. But like I put, like what you're seeing here is like 10 minutes for each spot here. And maybe, like on those days where you have, those 20 minutes, to work, your team, like 20 minutes is more manageable, to work like team offense, team defense. Those are all just things to kind of look at there. But like I said, I just put some stuff there for individual, and this isn't completely accurate here, but I put pass drops, pass rush. This is like some different stuff I actually took from. So I didn't actually complete this all the way. So anyway, that's what it is. Like I said, once you get to that point there, you're off the practice field because you run through, and then you get to, because the end of our period there is 9:45. So the kids got to be, walking back to class at that point. So like I said, that's just some things to look at. When we talk about practice, especially, at a small school level. So that's just kind of the things we deal with. But so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and this podcast with homegrown football. If you guys have any podcast ideas, I've got some different things I'm considering for next time. Practicing with a few players, tips for new coordinators. Mainly looking at defensive coordinator. I've never been an offensive coordinator, so I am looking at maybe doing a podcast on my tips for new coordinators. Been doing this a while, and I've definitely developed some things that I've learned along the way. So I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for watching this. Be sure to subscribe. Check out my Instagram for other updates. We'll have a lot of different things coming out here. We'll be checking back next week for the next podcast. And just wanted to say thank you guys so much for supporting me through this. Hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. Be sure to leave any ideas that you have for me to do podcasts on, and I'll kind of consider them and see if we can get some down. But I've got more ideas to kind of come. So, like I said, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching this, and we'll see you next time. Mr. Football out.